Hello everyone. My name's Sarah Piper. I'm the director and founder of a business called Invisible Partners. We help organisations with a whole host of people and talent-related challenges. And as part of that role, we've been in loads of conversations related to how we navigate this new world of work and how we navigate business objectives and priorities with the demand that employees now have around expecting and insisting upon flexibility and all the various forms that comes with. And so many organisations are really challenged by that. How do you deliver against what the priorities are of a business? How is culture affected with people not physically being beside one another? And there's a real plethora of questions and concerns around managing both sets of priorities. And I think in this climate where there are many areas of talent shortage, many employers feel held over a barrel somewhat around expectations they need to adhere to and accept with the priorities they have in business. So having been in the sort of front and centre of these conversations for the last 2 years, and now we're navigating physically coming back into the office, I thought it was a great time to pull together the collective wisdom of the three panelists that we have here today, to learn from the experiences they have, to lean upon their wisdom and to really bring this topic to life. How does company culture be fostered and celebrated and improved upon in this flexible working world? So let me introduce everybody on the panel today beyond me. We've got Felicity Delange here, who's the founder of Tilt Shift, who's a brand new, spanking new consultancy focused on helping organisations with improving culture and culture and people-related challenges. We've got Jo Smythe here, who is also the founder and director of her own consultancy business, Twigga. And Twigga does an awful lot of things around change and organisational design and loads of things. But we're really dipping into Jo's exposure into public sector and non-for-profit organisations and the insights and trends there. And then we have Laura Staples, who's the head of people and performance at Laminex. And the journey that Laura has been front and centre on with Laminex and the transition they have been on with their workforce has been so interesting. I'm actually going to start with Laura, that I think we could really learn something from. So Laura, you toyed with remote working before COVID was upon us. Can you tell us a little bit about your thinking around remote working and flexible working and the journey that you've led Laminex on in the last couple of years?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah, and it's obviously great to be here. What a fantastic conversation that we're having today around culture in a hybrid or a remote world. So yeah, Laminex has been on this journey for a couple of years now, and we were certainly having conversations pre-COVID around what flexibility could look like for our people, particularly when we thought about our value proposition and what are the benefits that we wanted to offer employees who either worked or came to work for us at Laminex. I think this week was actually the 2-year anniversary of sending everyone home. I think on the 16th of March, as with many other organisations, we wanted to do our bit to flatten the curve of increased cases. And we sent an announcement out to all of our office-based workers, which was about 450 at the time, saying grab your keyboard and your screen and go home and we'll work out how we're going to connect moving forward. Since then, we've now adopted 100% remote working for that group of employees. Obviously, another part of our organisation, we're an Australian-based manufacturer. We have all of our wonderful plant employees and our distribution centre employees that still work on site. But for our sales teams, our marketing teams, our support teams across the country, we're now part of a work from anywhere model, which that we're really proud of. And it's certainly evolved over the last 2 years.
That's fantastic. And I think it's a really bold approach that you took just to rip off the Band-Aid and make that statement around work from anywhere. In the diverse workforce you just described, some manufacturing and some able to work from home, what were some of the resistance points that you faced through that change journey?
Look, I think one thing that I've noticed with the dynamic workforce that we have is that they've been very accepting, because the journey was out of a need to create a safe work environment for our people. And the less people that we had on site that didn't need to be there, the more safety and the better the environment for those who had to come to work and make the beautiful product that we obviously create for our customers. I think the change evolution has been more around giving people the skills and the tools to be able to manage their teams in a remote setting, and still make sure that culture and communication is a foundation of great working habits. We created something called the 5 C's of remote work, which was our model that we would teach and educate leaders on how to get the best out of their people whilst working 100% remote, and how we were going to nurture culture in particular whilst we were working apart.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I'm going to come back and delve into that a little bit deeper in a moment. But I think what I loved about your story, and what so few organisations that we've been exposed to have done, is equip leaders to make that transition to lead teams in a remote setting. How do you ensure accountability? How do you offer trust as a default, but make sure that when someone's taking the mickey, you call them out on it? What does that look like when it's remote? And so I'll come back to you in a moment just to delve a little bit deeper around how you've skilled your leaders up to make that transition. Felicity, which I find really hard to call you Felicity rather than our informally. Can you tell us a little bit more about the experience that you had when you were working with Inlight and the journey that you took them on, the role that you played?
Yeah, absolutely. For context, Inlight is a digital services business, so we sat at around the 35-40 mark when we like Laura said, kind of made the decision to pick up our laptops and exit swiftly. I think the interesting kind of, I guess, period that we went through in responding and adapting is really contextualizing and understanding what works well for our own business. So going through and asking the questions and listening and observing. And what I think that lends to is the idea of people being comfortable not knowing, and no one knew what to do at that point. You can look outside and look for inspiration. So everyone's kind of looking around resources and asking questions and getting support from other people. But really importantly is kind of looking in and observing and understanding what's happening, and not treating everyone as the one size fits all approach. Because I think more than anything, we really understood that there are so many different needs that present across the business. And so really making people feel safe enough that they can come and ask questions. The professional and personal lines certainly blurred around the types of conversations that we all would have been having during those periods. But even being curious enough to understand of like, okay, this is being presented by somebody. Is this being experienced by others as well? Is this something that we need to respond to on an individual basis or more collectively? And also just recognizing the length of time, or like when it was required to move quickly and make a fast decision, i.e. let's get our machines and kind of set up quickly from home, versus making decisions that really impacted the future direction of the business, and where really thoughtful consideration needed to be applied as to what is possible for us to do, what are all the moving parts. Because I think anytime you're dealing with a complex system, which any organisation is, you need to recognise all the interactions and interdependencies on those decisions, and recognise that if you pull one lever over here, it's going to have that impact over there. So it was a really interesting exercise. I think there's a lot of realization that physical space that an office provides does a lot of the heavy lifting for your culture. So everything thereafter becomes a very deliberate conversation and decision that needs to be made around how might we be able to replicate this same thing that we recognize as an important part of our culture. How might we kind of do away with things that aren't serving us in this current context? So every decision is like an adaptive, does this make sense for our business and our team at this point in time? And how might we be able to experiment and try things without kind of going full, taking weeks to decide on something and fixing it, but saying, let's try it in a small experiment first, see what the response is, and then kind of make it more permanent. Because as everyone would have known, you make plans to go back to the office about half a dozen times in that period. And that is it's as I said, the communication is really key during that period, as well as just being really transparent and really authentic in communication. So pick up on the other word of proud. I think when we released the working from ongoing hybrid working direction, that's the response that came back from our team, is like, this makes sense, and I'm really proud that the business has taken this decision. And that's contextualizing and providing a solution that makes absolute sense for your own people. That's what's really required to do something that's going to work for that current point in time.
Totally. And also sort of delving in a bit deeper, Felicity, around the resistance points, or even the unexpected benefits. Obviously, we all have appreciated the benefits of no commute and the impacts on being able to fit more into our day in this virtual world. Were there any real areas of resistance around continuing in this hybrid model? And then sort of part B of that question, were there any kind of unexpected blessings or unexpected positives in the model that you continue with in life?
Yeah, the resistance points, I think, is what anyone experienced in returning to the office, that anything required that little bit of effort. It's like the questions that you get about like how that's going to work and what it's going to look like is people just really losing the ability to, or even, I have to commute into work. I have to make an effort to have a conversation and engage with people. I'm just out of practice. So the resistance points were, this doesn't feel right because we haven't been doing it for such a long time. And so I think that's your opportunity when you're providing reasons rather than rules for people to come back to, is that people go, yes, I'll come back because it makes sense to do this in person. And that is particularly for a really smart bunch of problem solvers, they're always looking for the why. And I think a lot of the resistance to coming back to the office is that people are jumping online and in Zoom calls in an office context. And so not making the most of the opportunity to be there. So we actually went through and had all our interaction points across the rituals and meetings that happen across the business. Which of these are more appropriate to be done in person? And ideation, new and novel things like onboarding, where we're going, it would be great if these things were done in person if we can. And I think then people recognized that for those opportunities, and you can smush all stuff into a day, we're going to do a team lunch as well as doing a brainstorming session at the start of a project, and we're going to do one-on-one. And so people at the end of that day would be like, yes, it took effort to come in, but I really was reminded of how great it is to work with people, and that sense of connection made it so that they want to come back again. And unexpected benefits, I think the flexibility thing has been a hard thing to address over the years. And it's kind of hard to talk perhaps of the benefits of the few years that we've lived through, but it certainly forces the conversation around businesses being allowed to make these decisions and to really progress the conversation around what flexible working would look like. And certainly I know working parents being involved in the early years of their kids' lives, I think it's done a lot to really advance the role that working parents can play in being able to balance that admittedly very difficult thing to do, but they like to be around more in those early years, which was really lovely.
Yeah, it's been transformative, I think. Transformative of the traditional male role, parents and father's role in that as well, I think.
Yeah.
Joe, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. I'd love to understand, and I know, Joe, that you work with a whole host of diverse clients, so I'm very cognizant of that, but I'm particularly interested to lean upon your experience in working with non-profit clients as you do, and in the kind of public sector domain, to see if there's anything that's curious or specific to that group of people. And if you can just give us a sense about the exposure you've got to that group of people and some of the insights that you've got around how they've responded to the journey we've been on in the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. And I have to say, all of the above from Laura and Felicity, I'm sort of madly nodding my head in agreement with everything that you've said. The work that we do with our clients is primarily focused around culture and around change. And so what we've seen, particularly in our non-profit and for-purpose clients, the challenge is not too dissimilar to what we see in our corporate clients, in that at the moment, the big question is, how do we foster our organisational culture in this virtual world? How do we actually do this thing now? Pre-COVID, I think lots of organisations were struggling with how do we bring flexibility and balance to our people so that they can feel like they can work from home. And, a lot of, or certainly from my past corporate experience, has been that, you sort of need to have a special reason for that. And then COVID kind of just crashed through that, almost overnight. And all of a sudden, everybody was working at home. And so we've gone from that environment of everyone being in the office to then everybody being at home. So to that extent, it's almost the same, right? So the same challenges in the office around meeting rooms and people and who's in and who's not, to the challenge of everyone being at home, everyone's on Zoom trying to figure that out, or Teams, or whatever platforms, different organisations are using. The for-purpose non-profit sector is no different. The same challenges are there in terms of how do we keep our people connected, how do we engage with our clients, our partners, our stakeholders, how do we make sure that we can still deliver the work of purpose, which for some of our clients was very much, in-person, face-to-face work. For some of them, it wasn't. So it's how do we help them make that change? One of our clients, in particular, in the non-profit space, was heavily involved in lots of face-to-face training in the field that they're in. And so they had to just shift overnight to online training because the need for what they didn't go away. It was just the way they had to deliver it needed to change really quickly. And so what we've seen in some of these organisations is a very rapid uptake in terms of technology and digital proficiency, where that may have not been first and foremost, in their minds before that. We did a study in the education sector in year one of COVID with half a dozen schools that allowed us to hang out with their principals and some of their teachers for a little bit. And we were able to track almost right down to time to proficiency. So how long did it take, a teacher, an educator who's very much in a face-to-face environment to connect to the digital tools, because they had all the infrastructure there available to them. It's just that, that burning platform concept just wasn't there before. So how do they do that? How do they engage with the children? How do they teach differently, knowing that the parent is probably sitting at the other side of the kitchen table? So a whole lot of different challenges, for them, in how they deal with that. But the core question of that is the same, right? How do we keep our people connected? How do we nurture our culture during this time so that it doesn't fall over? How do we call it the unheroic work? What is all of that stuff, this, the incidental learning that happens, for early career professionals in any industry, that happens through bumping into someone, hey, Sarah, I saw you in the coffee shop, I meant to tell you this. That has to be orchestrated and deliberately, created for that to happen. And that hasn't been easy for every organisation. And I'd probably say it hasn't been easy for any organisation. Some have managed to do it quicker, better, maybe because they have different resourcing and capabilities to do that. And others are just kind of still sort of bumbling their way through it. But we are seeing that common thread, that Laura's mentioned and Felicity's mentioned, is how do we actually nurture that culture in this space now?
Totally. That is the burning platform. How do you make sure that culture isn't completely eradicated and you move forward through this new world? Joe, you've talked to me off camera in preparation for this conversation around some of the platforms and the mechanisms in which you get people to agree to things collectively. Yeah. And one of the things that our clients are navigating is, do we insist upon a mandate on fixed days? And I know, Laura, you've got a very different answer to this because you've opened up the choice for the individual, which is wonderful. But I think loads of employers are looking to achieve the hybrid, the sort of holy grail of the hybrid. So there is a mandated or suggested or recommended fixed days in the office and some from home. I'm interested in, Joe, in how you have chosen or how you've applied what you do to navigate that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a real passion of ours. And certainly the last 2 years, we've been able to work with some fabulous clients on helping them navigate that. before COVID, we started a program that we call the social contract, which is basically about, we use a whole bunch of human-centered design techniques, and we sort of bring it together as a bit of a recipe. And we bring teams together. We would often use that following a restructure or a change to help those teams reconnect and navigate what their future ways of working will be. This is really the unheroic work. This is the conversations that happen between people. And we take teams away for a day. And we've done this in we've probably put now close to 400 to 500 people through our program, the social contract, over the last 2 years. It's been quite instrumental during COVID times, because what we do is we get teams to come together either in a room or together virtually, whatever, depending on the timing of that work. And we work through some very deliberate strategies around empathy, connection, engagement. And by the end of that session, the teams create their social contract. They create for themselves their ways of working, so that the organisations that we've worked with have not dictated it must be 2 days or 3 days or Monday or Friday. They've not said when you come together it's for collaboration or anything. What they've done is they've taken a really enlightened approach, we think, around having the teams decide what their ways of working is going to be. Saying to a team of 100 people, choose your own adventure, like, to me, it's all good in theory, right? We've wanted that forever, but that's a really big question to have people tackle when we've worked in a very industrialized model for, certainly 100 or so, however many years, right? So the work that we're doing in these organizations is helping them have the conversation. And the thing that we see come out of it most by about 3/4 of the way through the day is, I had no idea you were feeling the same way. I didn't know that was also a problem for you, because we can't see people in that space. So getting the teams to get really right deliberately into, one of our clients in the government sector clearly had a very big challenge with meetings. So they created a meeting game plan. So they had 3 to 5, explicit statements around how they were going to manage meetings in this context. Another one of the organisations was trying to work out, what do we do when we're actually on site together? Do we say collectively no meetings? But allowing the teams to decide those ways of working, it means that they will embed that change, they will lead that change, and they will make that work.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Jo. That's gold. Laura, I'd love to understand, with you being slightly the outlier, because you've taken a completely different approach of saying make your choice, do it for yourself, and work from anywhere how you want. What have been the learnings along the way? What has worked? What's not worked? What have you had to adjust?
Yeah, so I mean, our approach is that we trust our people to choose when, where, and how they work. It's a really simple philosophy and mindset that we've spent a lot of time and resource educating leaders on how to manage in that environment. But I think the outcome of that has been this, genuine and visible empowerment of people to make choices, and therefore be more productive and more engaged as a result of that. And yes, of course, there's been people that we've had to provide extra support. There have been people that have just fallen into this and been able to manage it completely themselves, because, they feel like this was the environment that they were born to be in, and they absolutely love it. I think there's always going to be a scale. People that, sit there are the early adopters versus those that you've got to bring a little bit more along for the journey. But the benefit of having that trust culture is that people look at decision making themselves. They work collaboratively with their teams to, find the best way of working that's going to work for them. You get more accountability of the output. So, it's been a great way for us to be able to move from, not that it was this, but the elements of an hours-based environment where that's what naturally comes from being in an office. That judgment that comes from when someone leaves early to pick up their kids or whatever it might be, they arrive a little bit late, to being fully accountable for the outcome, the output, the deliverables. And to do that, we had to get really, really clear on what our strategy was, what our goals were, and everyone's role to play in achieving the strategic goals of the business, so that they could self-manage. They could choose when, where, and how they work. So yeah, look, there's lots of things. I love that. I think both Felicity and Joe have actually mentioned the word deliberate a couple of times, and I've noted that down. You have to be really intentional. You've got to call out to everyone, hey, we're doing this to improve our culture, or hey, we're doing this to keep us connected whilst we're working apart. You know, for years we've designed initiatives or experiences for teams or workforces, but we've never really labelled it as this is a deliberate initiative for culture. And over the last 2 years, that's something that we've had to do. And there's been wonderful benefit from doing that.
Again, in preparation for this call, Laura, you and I discussed off camera how your culture has flourished in this current way of working. And I think one of the fear-based statements I hear from clients is, how can you have a culture when you're not next to each other? That's the relinquishing of control really frightens many employers and many leaders, and the fact that the culture is dictated to around physical time. And you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, you touched on it around the comms strategy that you've employed and adopted and rolled out. Can you tell us a bit more about how communication has been so central? Because I recall you mentioned that the commentary you'd had from your team was people felt more informed, more engaged, more connected than ever before in this current context. So I'd love for you to help us understand how that's been achieved.
So early on, the HR team really had to plot what the employee life cycle looked like, and we had to go in and think about, these are all the touch points. This is where we interact with our people, and these are the key messages that we needed to get across. The two initiatives that we've really transformed over the last 2 years is, one, been our internal comms processes, and two, our onboarding. And before I get to the internal comms one, we've had to, in order to create culture when people don't actually come face to face, we've created tactile experiences for people as part of onboarding packages that go to employees' home that have a piece of our product, so they get to actually feel what we make and what they've come to be a part of, that have got, the t-shirt so that they can wear it and feel a part of the team. All of those things are really deliberate, things that we've curated into an experience that they can have coming to Laminex. The comms piece is something that very early on we wanted to create an experience that was all about having fun. There was so much uncertainty in the world, and people, we had to work with well-being and mental state and how people were actually adapting. We created an internal TV show, and it started off as, let's have a bit of fun. It's called Laminex Live, and we have external hosts that, like a Today Show format, come into the business every month, and we go online and we broadcast out to the entire organisation. We've got our executive GM that speaks. We've got people from the front line sharing their stories, and we've got a consistent host that takes us through that experience. And it's been fantastic. We're now in our 3rd season of Laminex Live. Each episode is centred around bringing in global thought leadership to talk about what's happening in the world around us for this season. And the engagement, the fun, the laughter, the shared stories, all of these things have been a great way to be able to celebrate the things that we don't see because we're not together every single day. But it's a great way to keep connected and catch up with everyone.
Love it.
I absolutely love that, Laura. That's like, I think it touches on a really broader theme around creativity and the idea that in the way in which when you're navigating unknown territory, the experimentation part is all creativity. Like, maybe we could do this, maybe we could try this. And sometimes things work and sometimes unexpected things work. And the kind of wild and bold things like a live TV show is, I don't know whether that would have been something that would have been floated in pre-COVID world as being necessary to begin with, but just how uniting that can be. It's such a brilliant demonstration of trying something new. It's great.
Absolutely. And answers a very core question that we're here to chat about around how do you navigate or create a culture in a remote world. Invisible Partners, we have a fully remote workforce, and we always have done pre-COVID, but the things that we needed to do to galvanize that workforce during COVID that we did do that worked really well for us were things that were not work related. So fitness challenges, wellness challenges to keep a connectivity that you would that would kind of replicate the water cooler conversation, but keep us focused on health and well-being. And that just that worked incredibly well for us, and got great feedback and made you feel connected to one another beyond work exchanges.
I think I'm going to jump in.
Please.
Creativity is absolutely a point that I think people who are designing things for workplaces and need to be able to navigate this uncertain period that we're in and this constant change. Creativity is the number one skill. There's a great book out there. It's called Everyday Creative. It's about making magic at work. Have you got it on the shelf? There you go.
Yeah, it's on the shelf.
That has been, we've given it out to employees and we've got them to think, well, if you can put yourself into someone else's shoes, how would you reimagine this exact experience? And using a creative mindset to be able to redesign these things, I think that's helped us along. So highly recommend that you go and grab that book.
Yeah, done. Felicity, I was just going to ask you if there was anything that you particularly, or Inlight particularly, employed to help foster that culture piece during the last couple of years, or things that worked for you particularly well around culture specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting, the I guess the sense of responsibility, like whose responsibility is it for culture? And I think we were in a fortunate position that we already had a very strong culture. Strong culture sounds like a weird thing, because what is that? Sometimes people have been discussing with me lately this idea of like having a nothing culture. That's kind of like that we need help. We have a nothing culture, and I was like, oh, okay. But the strength, I mean, in the connections with the team and the sense of pride in working for the team, and having a shared sense of responsibility, which was one of the values. So I think what did work, I'll go back to that idea of experimentation, of seeing which of the rituals that we employed face-to-face could be translated. So using things like creating different Slack channels, things like games we played in the office. We had a really great demonstration of an adaptation is we used to do a build me up at the conclusion of every fortnight, where people would go around, shouting out to people who had done great work. And it was how we would end that all company meet, and thinking about making really intentional decisions around how often do you get the whole company together? What are the things that really bind us together in this way? And that's kind of how the team would go into the weekend, would have this kind of build me up. Of course, doing that remotely, I was like initially hacking things together by, getting that from people manually and putting it together, until one of our designers said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we built a platform? There's plenty of capability in the business to do that. And so what that looked like was a platform very, very rapidly kind of put together, a designer and two devs who created this platform, accompanied with GIFs where it would be based around the values. So, shout out to Laura for, doing amazing work on that client thing, It would also be a bit of fun. Like people would be like, great gift choice. And we would go around the team and people would read that out. And it was a really uniting way to kind of, again, conclude that ritual that was important to us, but done in a different format. And I think there's just a bunch of examples like that where the team generated those ideas. Another one, which was a music league, which you'd create a theme and people would come up with a song and you would vote on your favorite song. And in those darkest days of lockdown, people would be like, when's the song list coming up? Who won this week? What's the theme next week?
Yeah.
And I think some of those really early stage ideas, we would run competitions, weekly competitions, and some of that stuff feels like it's lost now, but that I think kind of brought a whole lot of joy and novelty to some of those things. And there's no reason why those things can't be continued and reconsidered now. I know, Sarah, you and I had a meet the other week where we did a walking meeting, and I was like, I haven't done these in a while. And it's like, yes, you can actually just get up from your desk and walk around and have a chat with someone as your one-on-one, if it's not something you need to sit and stare at a Zoom screen for another 45 minutes or an hour. And I think the other thing that all businesses need to be mindful of is just some of the preventative measures that can be taken to avoid to avoid the onus being on the individual. So what are the structures that are in place in the scaffolding that mean that it's not an individual's kind of, it doesn't fall on them to have to kind of push back and make that decision. For instance, the kind of work anytime, anywhere does not equate to working anytime. And I think people are working longer hours now, and productivity it has gone up in a lot of organisations, but that's not a sustainable thing. And so, what are some of the guidelines that are in place to avoid people being in those situations where they feel that it's expected for them to respond to calls at a certain time or to respond to Slack messages or emails, and to structurally embed those things into the business so it doesn't fall to the individual to kind of go, oh, it's like the old leaving at 3 to pick up the kids thing. It's the same thing at home. So there's different but similar issues that are stemming from adapting to this work from anywhere, anytime kind of situation, where businesses need to be a lot more deliberate in that support that's around individuals. And I can't even remember what the question I was responding to, because I've just gone off on some tangent, Sarah. So please redirect me.
All good stuff's all gold. Jo, do you want to make comment on anything that was just talked about around things that you've seen work around culture? I am keen to move forward to what we're now facing into, which is no restrictions, and therefore what does it look like? But Jo, I'll give you a chance to make comment on anything you've heard before.
I think the common thread coming through here, and it was something that we saw pre-COVID, when it comes to culture, and I think, Laura, you mentioned, we've had the luxury of having buildings and spaces that can, compensate for that, and we can let culture evolve. But I think culture is something that you need to be intentional about. You need to deliberately nurture that. And I think, if anything, the experience of COVID has shown so many organisations that we can't just let culture, organically become what it is, right? And you see that in, in the for-purpose sector, where things start from, the need to do social good, and then you bring a whole bunch of people in that want to do that as well, and then all of a sudden you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the culture has wandered off into something unintended because we never sat back and deliberately nurtured and created that culture that we want. I think the upside of COVID and putting us all into this kind of remote sort of weird world is that we have had to be more deliberate with that. So for some of those organisations that perhaps hadn't thought about that before, it's become something that is front of mind for them now, which I think is really great. It just creates much better social outcomes for those organisations, but also becomes a much better employee value proposition for people that are moving and looking at different careers, to know that that culture is at the front. It's front and centre now, whereas it never, it may have been talked about previously, or it may have been, culture, that old chestnut, that's the problem with everything. It is now actually front and centre, and we're seeing that creativity and that deliberate action and the things that work and the things that don't work. And I think that's just going to make future organisations all the more fabulous with what they're doing with their people.
Or not. So I think the organisations are, I think it's such a competitive landscape for talent, and evaluating 2 or 3 things minimum in terms of employment opportunities. I think it's a real missed opportunity for those organisations that aren't getting deliberate about their culture. Jo, I'm going to stay with you for a second and ask, if we now think about the current state and future states, and now there are limited restrictions around where you can work, and the Victorian government only a few weeks ago lifted the ban around, can you please preference working from home? Now it is open fodder around how you create your workplace, and whether it's hybrid or fully remote or completely on site. Do you think culture with no physical contact can be created? Do you think it's impactful?
Look, I think at the end of the day, we're human beings, and we need interaction with other human beings to actually survive and thrive in our worlds. So look, I don't know, maybe call me the old school or the black hat one here, but I don't know that 100% virtual is going to work for everybody all of the time. I think, that we've got the opportunity to have choice in our workplace now, I think is sensational. But I think we need to help people navigate that choice, because it is a big thing to say to somebody, choose your own adventure, like, you know, and you know, I think, you know, even Laura mentioned before, you know, we've got to put some learning and some education and some, you know, help leaders lead that, because, you know, it may not be a lack of trust. It could just be, I don't know how to deal with this situation, so therefore I won't. So then you run down a whole other path of things. It could be, I didn't know that you were also feeling and thinking that, so I didn't do anything. So look, I think there's got to be some kind of face-to-face connection. I think as humans, we need that. We crave that. We saw in the first year of COVID, you know, everybody, you know, cheering and celebrating. Yeah, hey, we can work from home. Isn't it great? You know, I can duck out to pick the kids up from school, or I can go for a run, or start a bit later, or do some things during the middle of the day that I might not have done previously. But then in that second year, we started to see organisations saying to us, our people just want to come back and do something together. What is it that they can do? They don't want to be back all the time. They just want to come back some of the time. So I think having the mix, I think, is going to be really important. I think, you know, if we're thinking about things like diversity and talent, and inclusion and equity and access, I think we need to look at it really broadly without it being a all in, all out kind of proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you're okay on the tech front, Laura. We missed you, but you're back.
I'll drop out then.
No problem. So I'm asking, just for your purpose of yourself, Laura, we're just thinking about the current state and future, and that doesn't sound like Laminex is going to change very much, because you've made the bold changes that you have made. But I asked the question in a slightly clunkier way. Can you have an employee who's truly invested in the company when you can't physically touch it? Felicity, do you feel like anything is lost by not having the Friday night conversation, the water cooler conversation? Do you feel like that the culture is being at all eroded with the hybrid model that many of us are navigating now?
I don't know whether erosion. I think that the perhaps unthinking way in which we used the office before is, of course, that's how we have always experienced work. And thinking about the conditioned ways in which you would think, oh, well, it's just easy, we've knocked off for the week and we'll go out for drinks, which is working in Collingwood was a really lovely thing to do at the end of the week, or playing board games in the office, whatever it may be. But that also excluded a section of the team, which were working parents who were racing home on a Friday. And so intentional design of how might we create experiences that bring people together is a question that should have been asked back then, and perhaps wasn't given as much attention. And I think that, again, going back to creativity, what are some of the other ways in which we can bring the team together? And whether that's a whole team experience, or whether it's just creating social connections across different parts of your business. So for those that use Slack, the integration that we use for a long time, Donut, which is kind of a random pairing of people in the office that can happen at a frequency that you like. And people would then just, you know, they could, when we were physically located, they, you know, could go out for a coffee or go for a run together or whatever that may be. But in that kind of held up during lockdown periods. And for those that were within the 5 kilometres, they would go for walks together, and people kind of really lent into that. And I think just having some kind of sense of social connection, it could just be one-to-one. I know a lot of companies as well are bringing together groups of people around common interests. So whether that is, it could be around dealing with a lot of the heaviness in the world, like people that want to have those conversations. We've got, you know, Black Lives Matters was a really big thing that happened kind of in amongst that we wanted to talk about as a business as well. So there's kind of different opportunities for people to come together with intention, or it could be just around interests that they have around gaming, or, you know, pop culture thing, whatever it is, or around parenting and the struggles that kind of homeschooling presented, is bringing people together and uniting them around points of interest that they would feel supported and have a sense of kind of belonging, I guess. Because I think that's what, to Joe's point around, like, we're social beings, we want to be together. I think the sense of creating belonging in an organization is really critical, and being able to kind of feel like you are seen and heard are things that, again, perhaps didn't hold up as much in pre-COVID times, but the organizations that were doing it well then, it was noticeable. But even more so now, where people are like, okay, I feel like I'm cared for by the organization. I feel like I have the opportunity to kind of, speak up and express myself and ask questions and whatever it may be. But yeah, it's definitely cultivating a sense of belonging in an organization is really important.
And I think that creates too, Felicity, choice, doesn't it, as well? It gives people, sorry, Laura, it gives people choice over that as well. So that belonging, that choice, if you want to come together, physically to have coffee or whatever, or if you want to do that via Zoom, or that people actually are able to make some choices about that. Now, I think that's been a really important shift.
Yeah, and it moves away from that mandating language, which are kind of like, I think
you must be at 5 o'clock drinks.
Different words that kind of pop up in this kind of like last couple of years, and mandate just makes me like kind of think, oh, really? Are we
got to be really careful not to apply old ways of thinking to new world challenges. And yes, look, we don't have any intentions to come back to the office, but we have recognised that, and we refer to it as the psychological contract. There were things that people got out of working in an office that didn't have anything to do with productivity or being able to perform their role, but it was the psychological benefits of being able to share a sandwich with someone in the lunchroom. They might live at home, or their kids may have left home, or that was their element to make their well-being more positive. Being able to go for a drive and have that disconnect period between when you finish work and then you've got that 45-minute drive home, that was your ability to switch off and put the mum hat back on, get dinner ready, or whatever it needs to be. They're the elements that have gone, and so you've got to create different things. Our last Pulse survey, we went up 6 points in engagement. So I absolutely passionately believe that you don't have to be physically together to have a happy, engaged workforce. I think you can do things that honour your culture. We're an 85-year Australian manufacturing organisation. That's a lot of built up culture over a long period of time that we've been able to maintain and honour, but also create new pathways for the next generation of people that come in and lead this business, because we've been able to reinvent ourselves and create a new shape of what working at Laminex looks like that doesn't require 4 walls to create. I just think that we've got to, our responsibility of leaders is to not go back to things that we were used to in order to solve the problems of tomorrow. And maybe those office spaces could be social clubs. We have a space that we're still in a lease, and so rather than allowing people to come in and do what we call deep work there, we're turning into a social zone. So all desks are being removed, walls are coming down, and it's going to be like the Laminex Social Club, where people can connect and come together and hang out. But they don't need to bring their laptop and do their emails. It's a conversation space.
Love it. Yeah. I'm going to throw a couple of questions to you, Laura, which are the regular questions that are posed to me around the reasons why this won't work. And I'm keen to understand, Laura, how you've navigated these challenges, particularly around graduates or early career individuals that, in an on-site environment, the perception is they soak up the learnings like a sponge, and that kind of learning through osmosis is really achieved through, incidental overhearing of conversations and kind of impromptu coaching. How have you supported your early career or graduate team members to get that same learning at that same exposure virtually?
Creating buddy systems. So, being able to team someone up that is more experienced and I mean, look, there's some reverse mentoring that comes from that, right? So people who are early on that may not have worked in an office space that are really comfortable with technology can support someone that's always been in an office space that hasn't been readily adaptable to technology. And then they both get to learn from each other. So to support our younger employees that have just finished university degrees and, this is their first role, they've been connected with people that can take them on that journey with them. That would be, I think, buddy systems work really well there.
Has anybody else got any commentary around how they've managed the early career kind of conundrum that has been highlighted through lack of exposure to one another?
I think it comes back to that deliberate nature. So what the example Laura's has given is very much around how do we plan and structure for those sorts of things, which is a different and future way of thinking, right? So we're not just going to have the chance encounters where you bump into someone in the corridor and go, oh hey, I thought we should talk about this, and a lot of the physical workspaces that have been redesigned recently into open plan, activity-based kind of campus style physical structures were designed intentionally for those chance encounters, those kind of people collisions, if you like, so that you get that interaction and shift in productivity and efficiency in a different kind of way. I think for organizations that do have a focus on early career professionals, and we've certainly seen this in our corporate clients, but also in our non-profit clients where they're of a different professional discipline. Putting those structures in place for that learning is really important. Explaining to a client that you've got the new graduate in the room, not because the client's paying for the senior person and getting the junior to do the work, actually explaining our new graduate Joe is here because we want Joe to hear and see. So that's why Joe's in the Zoom room today, right? Joe's not here to take notes or do the virtual coffees. Joe's here to learn and observe, and actually putting that out there to clients, and clients respond, quite positively to that because they see that you are actually taking the lead on helping develop the next generation of professionals coming into that industry or that sector.
That's a great call. Love it. Felicity, you do a great job, or Inlight do a great job of bringing on early career individuals. Did you find something that worked for you guys?
I think there's some of the stuff is really obvious, and sometimes saying things really explicitly is very important to people who've not experienced work before. I think that idea of trying to empathize with what did that feel like when I started work and I wasn't actually sure how to show up and how do I ask questions, and I think being really mindful of what some of the things that might be challenging when you've not worked before, and that is where to go to for really obvious questions. If you need help with this, then this is, check out this wiki, or this is the person to go to, and then providing the learning and mentoring from a technical perspective, and then also the people support that's in place, and those kind of conversations are around how are you navigating these few weeks, or what are the goals that you have, or trying to kind of build that trust and that relationship where there can be a lot more realness in the conversation, because I think everyone that goes into work, I should say, the majority of people that go to work go there because they want to do a fantastic job. And so recognizing what some of those barriers are in place and having people feel more comfortable to have those conversations about some of the challenges they're facing, and then checking in with them to get an understanding of what they're experiencing, and making sure that it's not just a kind of set and forget, this person's come in and we've provided them a senior and we've provided them what are the expectations in the first couple of weeks? And again, going back to being super specific, here's what your first couple of days will look like. There's no expectation if you turn up to that client meeting for you to actually say anything. You don't have to. If you feel comfortable, please go ahead, but don't feel you have to. And then saying, and then after week 1, this is what this will look like, et cetera, giving them a clear ramp up period for that. This is all that you need to focus on in weeks 1 through to 4. And then making sure that you're checking in during that and getting the insights that you get from people new to new business is like, you cannot replicate that at other points in the employment experience, because the fresh eyes that you have and people, if you're reinforcing, if it's important for you to continuously improve and adapt and learn, there is nothing better that you can do than focus on that onboarding experience and reinforce those points in the early days of like, you coming in, we would like you to make the experience better for the next person. So we affectionately called them swinterns, which was Swinburne University interns. They would often write the onboarding material for the next person and create libraries for them, and that kind of level of investment and responsibility in like, you're actually asking me to do something that I'm heavily invested in and I want to support. And now one of our first swinterns is kind of overseeing, and since I've left the business, is kind of interviewing and bring people into the business, which is incredibly proud moment that they have the capability and the confidence and the investment to do that.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I'm going to throw a couple of sort of hot and sort of short, sharp questions that again are perceived blockers. I'm sorry to pick on you, Laura, but you're a kind of one end of the spectrum person, so I'm going to target another question to you. Just around 2 questions to you, Laura, and then I'll open up to the rest of the panel as a final topic. When you are managing non-performance, and so you suspect that someone is taking advantage of the fact that nobody can physically see them, and you're going to get that in every scenario, whether it's on-site or off-site, kind of, it's all about the individual, I know. But how have you supported your leaders to manage that kind of when it doesn't feel right, and you feel like someone's doing the wrong thing? What are the sort of tools and frameworks that you've given your leaders to manage that?
I think you answered it yourself. It happens whether you're on site or off site. I don't think the process changed, to be honest. I think the same warning signs are there. You pick up on the same signals, that gut feeling, the curiosity, the questions that you ask, the feedback from, peers, all of those things exist whether they're remote or in the office. And the process for HR to support a leader and managing those things are exactly the same as what you'd do if they were sitting over the petition or on the other side of the computer screen. I don't see that performance piece and the way in which you'd approach it changing.
And I completely agree. It's interesting that in preparing for this conversation, I've gathered lots of feedback from clients that are really holding firm around, you've got to come back into the office and these are the mandated days, and kind of not reading the room around the fact they're going to lose talent as a result. And so I've gathered some of those kind of recurring questions that might seem obvious to us, but
I'm going to be as bold as saying that leaders that have those reservations really need to do a self-reflection piece. Really ask themselves, why am I afraid of this? What is the element of change that I'm worried about? Is it that I'm not going to be able to see people? Is it I'm used to being able to do these things? Work on countering those things for yourself first before you then make that big decision for your workforce, because we are in an environment where it's a candidate hot market. You've got to create a compelling reason for people to come and work for you. And the world of work has shifted enough for expectations to be there. We haven't been doing this for a couple of months. We're 2 years into a new formed habit, a new expectation, a new way of working. We genuinely can't expect people to just come back to the way it was. So if you've got those reservations as a leader, spend the time on yourself first before you then make that decision for your workforce.
I think that's a really good point. And also having compassion for people who are in those positions that feel a lot of the time it comes down to confidence or lack of support to have really difficult conversations. And that those performance, particularly performance related or behavior related, a lot of the time it's leaders that feel like they're avoiding those conversations. And so the assumption that that person sitting in the office will then perform if they're there in the office is not a reasonable conclusion to jump to. If you've got a performance related issue, I think there's the coaching and support around that leader to be able to have a very human conversation, and also to kind of check in with the individual and provide them the feedback in a very supportive, encouraging way. here are the expectations, this is what we want to see from you, and this is the support that we're going to provide you to get there. So it doesn't feel like an adversarial process initially. It's kind of a curiosity, but also being curious about the leader and about their reluctance and resistance, because they're probably getting pressure from a whole lot of angles. And that's one less thing that they have to apply effort to if they can have a team that's in front of them. They probably just done with the working from home caper and want something to be a bit easier for them, but it's not the right conclusion to jump to, I don't think.
Absolutely. Anything you want to contribute to that question, Jill, before I summarise?
Wildly nodding my head in agreement. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think what I'm hearing from all of you conclusively is that being intentional about designing what the workplace that you want to own looks like, and being incredibly deliberate around giving employees choice to contribute to what that culture looks like. And I think, just to paraphrase Laura, not applying old world thinking to the current state that is no longer old world. So I think it's the future is now, and I think it's in this climate of hiring craziness, to do anything other than step into employee-led cultures and people-centric cultures is ludicrous. So thank you so much for your experiences, sharing your experiences and your time, and thank you for coming online again with me, since 2 weeks ago was a bit of a technical fail, and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sarah. It was fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, ladies.